Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Daf 95 of Pesach Pesachim. Great Daf, what do you want me to tell you? The differences between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. That's really like the bulk of the Daf. Honestly, I think the only difference is, not the only difference, the main one is like that you're allowed to have chametz around. I think. I guess we'll figure it out. Anyways, and then of course, what do you think it talks about at the end? Yep. Zavs, Zavas, classic. What Daf doesn't talk about that? Alright, Daf Tzadei Amud Aleph, all the way at the top. New Mishnah, Mabim Pesach HaRishon the Sheni. What is the difference between the Korban Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni? HaRishon also b'bayra u'v'al. So obviously, by Pesach Rishon, which is offered on Pesach, you're not allowed to have chametz around. V'asheni chametz u'matzah ima b'bayis. Whereas by the Pesach Sheni, you can have, amatzah sumrom yochlu, right? Chochukas Pesach yaisu also. You gotta eat the Korban Pesach Sheni with matzah maror, and it says you do it like all the laws of the Pesach Rishon. However, in your house, right next to your matzah, you can have your bread. No problem. Harishon ta'on halal ba'achilaso, v'asheni einu ta'on halal ba'achilaso. The Pesach Rishon, you have to say halal when you eat it, as we learned the other day, and as Janine pointed out on her Sugya Sister's blog, that by the Pesach Rishon, you say halal when you eat it, whereas by Pesach Sheni, you do not need to say halal. Or I guess if you don't need to, you probably don't say halal when you eat it. Zev zeton halal b'asiyasan. But nonetheless, both the Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni, you would say halal when you slaughter it in the Beis Hamikdash, as we learned also a little bit further back, probably almost a month ago. But you roast both of them, you eat matzah and maror with both of them, and both of them are doche Shabbos. Of course, both of them referring to the Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon, Chukas Pesach Yaisu also, b'mitzvah shebegufa akosum medaber. Okay, let's read that again. Tanu Rabbanon, Kichol Chukas Pesach Yaisu also, that you do the Pesach Sheni like all of the statutes, like all of the laws of the Pesach Rishon. B'mitzvah shebegufa akosum medaber. Now the pasuk is talking about things specific to the guf of the Pesach, to the Korban Pesach itself. So what does that mean? Sha'al gufo minayin. So how do I know that we even include things that are, there's like different levels of meta. So how do we know like immediate levels of meta are also included? What does that mean? Let's go right there for a second and it will make sense. Therefore it says amatzos sumrom yochlu. Let's go right there even a shtickle more and then we'll explain everything. Yochel afilu mitzvah shelo gufo. Is it possible that even like really meta kind of stuff would be included? Do not break any bones. Just like breaking a bone is specifically something that is related to the body of the Korban Pesach, also only mitzvahs related to the body of the Korban. Isi ben Yudah Omer, says Isi ben Yudah, Yaisu also, that it says you will, right, like all the statutes of Pesach Rishon, you will do it. Mitzvah shebegufo, akos medaber, and Isi ben Yehuda says that oso refers to the mitzvah shebegufo. So we're seeing three levels. Maybe we'll read that again in a second, but we're basically seeing three levels of mitzvahs related to the Korban Pesach. You have things related to the Korban Pesach itself, such as an example that we gave was etzem leishbru bo, don't break the bones of the Korban Pesach itself. Then you have things which are related, are separate but still related, such as amatzos sumrom yochlu, eat the Korban Pesach with matzos amar. It's kind of a definition of what the proper way to be eating the Korban Pesach is. So while it's not the Korban Pesach itself, it's matzah, it's maror, but it's all eaten, it's all done together. But then you have things like chametz. Chametz really has nothing to do, it has to do with Pesach. It's sort of more big picture associated with the Korban Pesach, which is that, when do you eat the Pesach Rishon? On Pesach, one of the big definitions, right? One of the big characteristics of Pesach is no chametz around. However, it's not related specifically to the Korban Pesach itself. It's more tangentially related. So that is not included. So let's read this again. Start from the beginning. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis talk. Chochukas Pesach Yaisu. Also, so you do the Pesach Sheni with all of the laws of the Pesach Rishon. Mitzvah shebegufa kasim medaber, and we're specifically talking about things related to the korban itself. Mitzvah she'al gufo minayin. How do we know that we even include things that are like related to the korban but aren't necessarily specifically the korban? Therefore, it says you'll eat it with matzah and maror, meaning it includes also not just the korban pesach, but also the things that are eaten with the korban pesach, matzah and maror. Does it even apply to other mitzvos that are generally connected to pesach, but not necessarily related to the pesach itself, or things that are eaten with the pesach, such as not having chametz around? So it says don't break any bones of the korban pesach sheni. Just like breaking bones is specific to the korban itself. It's the breaking the bones of the korban pesach itself. So I've called mitzvah shebegufo to the exclusion of mitzvos that are, meaning, so therefore it only includes mitzvos shebegufo, excluding mitzvos that like chametz. Isi ben Yudah says he doesn't learn it out from Be'etzim Liishburbo, rather Yaisu Oso, right? It says like all of the laws you will do it. Also means mitzvah shebegufa kasim medaber. It's talking about specifically the mitzvahs of the body of the korban pesach, not something like eating chametz. Amar Mai, we said earlier, yachol af mitzvah shelo agufo. We said, is it possible even mitzvahs that are not like related to the korban pesach, such as like chametz? Ha'amar mitzvah shebegufa kasim medaber. 1 second, what kind of question is that? The first thing that we said in the Gemara, when the Gemara started, the first thing that we said is the pasuk is saying that specifically the mitzvahs related to the korban pesach itself are what are included by the Pesach Sheni. So memele, that excludes things like eating chametz. You can have chametz around. So why does the Gemara then ask, Yachol af mitzvah shelo agufo? Is it possible that even mitzvahs that are not related to the korban pesach, is it possible that they'll be included? That you'll have to avoid, be careful of them on korban pesach sheni. But ha'amr mitzvah shebegufa kas medaber. The first thing you said was already that chochukas pesach yasu also is specifically referring to mitzvahs related to the korban pesach. So what's the havmina to assume otherwise? So this is what is going on in the Brisa. Ashta the amrat amatzos mor yochlu. Well, what was the next thing that the Gemara had said immediately after saying that it's only related to things, mitzvah shebegufo, things related to the Pesach itself? Immediately the next thing it says is, oh, by the way, you also eat it with matzah and maror. Matzah and maror aren't the korban Pesach. So that was confusing, right? On the one hand, you're saying only mitzvahs related to the korban Pesach itself, and then you're saying, oh yeah, but also, by the way, matzah and maror. So now I'm starting to think, Alma yasu also lav davko. So now I'm realizing, wait a second, when it says yasu also, when we just said it means davka mitzvah shebegufo, all of a sudden it's becoming clear that it's not necessarily only mitzvos shebegufo, because we're even including matzah and maror. Ema havale kifradu chlal. So now I'm thinking maybe actually what's going on, it's like a prat and klal. That you have a prat, which is a matzah smorim yochlu, idikon pesach matzah and maror. But then later on, if you look at the Pesukim, later on it says, so they do it like all of the laws of korban pesach. So we have a specific law, which is matzah and maror. Then we have a general law, which is that yaisuo. So that's what's called a prat uchlal, when you have a specific followed by a general. And what that means is, when you have a specific rule followed by a general rule, a prat followed by a klal, what that means is that don't limit it only to the prat. The reason why the general rule is following the specific rule is to say that don't limit it to the specific rule, rather make it more generally applicable. And therefore, in this case, what that would mean is don't limit the laws of Pesach Sheni to things like matzah and maror, even include things like getting rid of chametz. So afilu kol mile, even include everything. Nami kamash malon. That is why the Bryce had to say, wait, no, hold your horses. It's only matzah and maror that's included. And we'll see other things also, but something like not eating chametz is not part of that. Okay, very good. So it says so also specifically mitzvah shebegufo. Then we said, but it also includes matzah and maror. And then we say, but that's basically where it ends. It doesn't include chametz. Isi ben Yehuda hayetzem my avile. What does he do with the Chachamim's pasuk? Right, we had basically two options for how we know to exclude something like chametz. One was from the fact that it says one is because it says vetzim lo yishbru bo. Right, by Pesach Rishon it says vetzim lo sishbru bo. By Pesach Sheni it says vetzim lo yishbru bo. Now, so Tanna Kama learns out from vetzim lo yishbru bo that mitzvahs shebegufo, such as breaking the bones, to the exclusion of chametz. Now, Isi ben Yehuda learned it out from Chochu Kas Pesach Yasu Oso. Oso is referring to mitzvahs shebegufo to the exclusion of chametz. Now, so according to Isi ben Yehuda, etzem ha'ovedle. So what does he do with the Tanna Kama's pasuk of etzem leyishbru bo? Mibayle le'echad etzem sheish b'moach ve'echad etzem she'ein b'moach. He uses it like we learned the other day on Daf Pehei 10 days ago, that we had a havmina to say that that you have to eat all of the meat, and therefore maybe even that includes the marrow. Therefore it says vetzim liyishbru by Pesach Sheni, it's not needed, etc. So he learns it out to teach that even that you're not allowed to break even bones that have marrow, even though you want to eat the meat inside. Now, okay, so that's what he learns out from there. Rabbanan ha'yaisu also my avdile. What do the rabbis do with Isi ben Yehuda's pasuk of yasu oso, from which Isi ben Yehuda learns out mitzvah shebegufo? This is very interesting, that when it comes to Pesach Sheni, we try to do whatever we can so that you won't have to slaughter the Pesach Sheni for just one fellow. To the extent, Rashi's opinion is, that will even be metame somebody so that you can have two people. So if you have just one fellow who needs to bring the korban Pesach Sheni, right, he's tameh, he needs to bring the Pesach Sheni, so take a dead sheretz, like we learned about the other day, throw it at your friend, now he's also tameh, and then you'll bring the Pesach Sheni together. Now, of course, that's assuming that ein shochtim v'zarkan al tameh sheretz, whatever it is. That is what the rabbis learn out from Yasu Aso, to say that do whatever you can so that by Pesach Sheni you have at least a pair. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Chochukas a Pesach Yasu also, that you do the Pesach Sheni like all of the laws of the Pesach Rishon. Yachok Shem Sharishon Aser v'Bayira v'Vayimatze Kach Sheni also v'Bayira v'Vayimatze. Is it possible that just like by the Pesach Rishon you're not allowed to have any chametz around, maybe also by the Pesach Sheni you're not allowed to have any chametz around? Tamloma matzos mrom yochlu. Therefore it says take, eat the Pesach Sheni with matzah and mar. Okay, now this brisa is a little bit circuitous, I think is a word. But, so we're gonna make more sense of it in like a few more lines. But we're trying to figure out how come we know to exclude matzah, chametz. Vein the mitzvahs essay. So amatzos mrom yochlu is a mitzvahs aseh, a positive commandment. Mitzvahs lo saise minayin. How do I know that even negative commandments, prohibitions apply to the Pesach Sheni? Tamlom li ashir mimenu ad boker. Therefore, it also says in the context of Pesach Sheni that you shouldn't leave over any of the Pesach Sheni till the morning. So that's a mitzvahs lo saise. Vein the mitzvahs lo saise shenitak la aseh. But that was an example of a lo ta'aseh that is then connected to an aseh, because of course, what do you do if you do leave it over to the Pesach to the morning? You burn it, right? So that's a right lav shenitak la'aseh, as we've learned about recently. It's a mitzvahs lo ta'aseh that's immediately connected to a positive commandment, a mitzvahs aseh that you could do to remedy the lo ta'aseh. Mitzvahs lo ta'aseh gomer minayin. How do I know that even prohibitions that don't have a positive commandment following them, how do you know that they also apply to the korban Pesach Sheni? Tamlo ve'etzem liyishbru bo. Well, that's why the pasuk says ve'etzem liyishbru bo, do not break the bones. So that's just a regular old lav. Now, what is going on over here? Basically, this is what's going on over here. As we mentioned a minute ago, there's a concept of a prat uchlal, which means that if you have a specific law followed by a general law, so the general law basically comes to generalize the law. So basically, we had the havmina to say, well, it says amatzos mrom yochlu, that you eat the korban Pesach with the Pesach Sheni with matzah and mar. But then it says chol chukas Pesach, followed by a general rule of all the laws of Pesach apply to Pesach Sheni. So I may have thought to say that, yeah, mamish all the laws, even including like chametz, not having chametz around, etc. So that would be by a general prat uchlal. when you have a specific law followed by a general law, it means that the general law is coming to build upon the specific law and generalize it and say it's not limited to the specific, rather it applies to all cases. What's peculiar about Pesach Sheni is that there isn't just one prat followed by a klal. There are 3 prats followed by a klal. One prat being Amatzos Merom Yochlu, which we said was the positive commandment. We have another prat, which is Lo Sashir Mimenu Ad Boker, don't leave any of it until the morning, which if you do, then you have to burn it. So that's a lav anita klase. And we have a third prat, which is Ve'etzem Lo Yishbru Bo, don't break any bones, which is a regular lav. So we have 3 specifics. So in this case, we don't apply a regular prat uchlal. Rather, it becomes this interesting construct where each of the specifics that were listed is coming to include something that is similar and exclude something that is also similar, right? So we're going to now, for each one, for the Amatzos Merom Yochlu, we're going to find another mitzvah aseh, right? Amatzos Merom Yochlu is mitzvah aseh, so we're going to find another mitzvah aseh that is relevant in the Pesach Sheni, and we're going to find the mitzvah aseh that is excluded from Pesach Sheni. By the lav shenita kla'aseh, by lo sashir mimenu ad boker, we're going to find another lav anita kla'aseh that does apply to Pesach Sheni, and another one that is excluded. And when it comes to a regular lav, we're going to find a lav that is included by Pesach Sheni, and also a lav that is excluded from Pesach Sheni. That's sort of the construct that we have here. So again, if it was just a regular prat uchlal, so then the klal would be adding onto the prat and making it more general to all cases. But because this is basically 3 prats followed by a klal, then it becomes, well, let's look at each of the 3 prats and include something similar and exclude something similar. So here we go. So now, so where did we get up to? Ma prat meforish, where am I? I don't know where I am. Ma prat meforish mitzvahs essay. Okay, so now, I think that this is what we're up to, where I don't even know how to explain how to find it, but where it says, I think just this is what we got up to. So if you're following along, this is where we are. Ma prat meforish mitzvahs aseh, v'lo ta'aseh, shenita kla'aseh, v'lo ta'aseh gomer. So just like when we look at the prats, we find 3 of them, right? We have 3 prats and then a klal. Now those 3 are mitzvahs aseh, which is amatzos merom yochlu, v'lav shenita kla'aseh, which is lo sashir mimenu ad boker, and v'lo ta'aseh gamur, which is etzem lo yishbru bo. Av kol mitzvahs aseh, v'lo ta'aseh shenita kla'aseh, v'lo sa'aseh gamur. Fine. So we're also going to deal with all mitzvahs, all halachas of Pesach Sheni that are mitzvahs aseh, lo ta'aseh shenita kla'aseh, and lo ta'aseh gamur. And as I mentioned a minute ago, we're going to include one thing that is similar and exclude something that is similar. So what is the halacha that we are going to include by the mitzvahs aseh of amatzos merom yochlu? So in addition to eating the korban Pesach Sheni with matzah and maror, you will also sli eish, marbit sli eish. So you will also have to roast the Pesach Sheni. That's what we include. That's the mitzvahs aseh that we include. B'fratei ma'amit le. Now, what's the prat that we exclude? That's a mitzvah saseh, hashbas hasaor, saying that the tashbisu that you should get rid of leaven. So that's the mitzvah saseh, the commandment to get rid of leaven. Ipuch ano. Why don't I flip it around and say that we include getting rid of leaven and exclude roasting it? Mitzvah degufei alif, we'd prefer to include the mitzvah specifically related to the korban Pesach itself, i.e. roasting it, as opposed to chametz, which is more tangential. What are we including in the lav anita kla'aseh, when it says don't leave over any of the meat till the morning, and if you do, you have to burn it. So what is something that's also a lav anita kla'aseh that we include? Lo sotzi mimenu. Assuming that basically if you take some of the Pesach Sheni out of the house that you're eating it in, and then you bring it back into the house, you'll still be able to eat it. So that is included by Pesach Sheni. Bifrate, assuming that that's the halacha, I think it's a machlokas. Bifrate, my commandment lay, what are we excluding? Which lav anita kla'aseh are we excluding? Lo yirai v'lo yimatzeh. That when it says don't, that it shouldn't be seen or shouldn't be found, chametz, so that's a lav, but if you find it, you got to get rid of it. So it's also, we want to argue it's a lavanita class A. Okay, so far both of the exclusions have been chametz related. Let's see what the third one is. Ipuchano, 1 second. So we say, why don't we flip it around and say that we include getting rid of chametz and we exclude if you took it out of the house. Mitzvah de gufei adif. So again, better to include the mitzvah related to the korban itself, i.e. taking the meat out and bringing it back in, as opposed to chametz, which is tangential. When we say don't break any bones, what is a lota say that we are including in the korban pesach? By the Pesach Sheni, do not eat the Pesach Sheni if it's slightly cooked. What are we excluding? We're excluding lo sishchat al chametz dam zivchi. Do not slaughter the Pesach while you still have chametz around. I.e., when you slaughter the korban Pesach Sheni, you are allowed to have chametz at home. Ipochana, why don't I flip it around and say that you're not allowed to have chametz, but you are allowed to cook it slightly, still only slightly cooked, but not fully cooked. Mitzvah de gufei adif, we'd prefer to go after the mitzvah related to the korban itself, i.e. how well done you have to cook it, as opposed to not having chametz around when you slaughter it. So, basically all three of these came to teach that all mitzvahs related to chametz are waived when it comes to the Pesach Sheni. Interesting stuff, right? Of course. Alright, let's go weiter, friends. So we said that one of the differences between Pesach Rishon and Sheni is that the Pesach Rishon, you say halal when you eat it, right? What was it? Hilula Paka Igra, is that what it was? Halela Paka Igra. I think so, something like that, right? So, there was another thing also, something v'halela Paka Igra. Achila v'halela Paka Igra, was that what it was? Anyways, so how do we know that you say halal by the Pesach Sheni, but not by the Pesach? No, the opposite. You say halal by the Pesach when you eat the Pesach Rishon, but not when you eat the Pesach Sheni. Amr B'Yochanan Mishum Reb Shimon ben Yotzadok Amar Kra. The pasuk says in Yeshaya, I think. Yeah, of course. Hashiri Elochem, that when the redemption comes, the song will be for you. Kilel es Kadesh Chag, like the song on the night of the festival. Lala Mekudesh L'Chag To'on Halel, Lala Shem Mekudesh L'Chag in To'on Halel. A night that is specifically a festival night, you say halal, but not if it's not a festival night. I.e., when you eat the korban Pesach Rishon, so it's mamish halal. It's mamish Pesach. It's a festival. It's Yom Tif. You're going to say halal. When you eat the Pesach Sheni, it's pashut a regular day. So you're not going to say halal. But both the Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni require halal when you slaughter it. My time. How come? So Ibai Sema Laila Kamamait Yom Lo Kamamait. Well, one answer is that pasuk, which was saying, right, Kilel is Kadesh Chag, is specifically talking about Kilel is Kadesh Chag at night. It's talking about, saying halal, and therefore it excludes if it's not a Chag. But it only excludes nights, doesn't exclude afternoons when you're going to slaughter it. Ibai Sema Fiona will say, Efshir Yisrael Shochten es Peschain, Venodlin es Lulvein, Venomim halal. Isn't that a great line? How is it even fathomable that you can have the Yidden slaughtering a korban Pesach, or if it's Sukkot, they would take their lulav, and they're not going to say halal? It's such a geshmaka mitzvah. You're not going to say halal? Very nice. And you eat the Pesach Sheni roasted. But it also said that both the Pesach Rishon and the Pesach Sheni are docha Shabbos. Shabbos in Tumalo. So it's saying that the Pesach Sheni is docha Shabbos, sure, but it's not docha Tumah. If you're tamei when it comes time to do Pesach Sheni, sorry, bro. Try again next year. Must listen to Rabbi Yehuda. So our Mishnah therefore must be unlike Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya is we learn in the Brayso docha es Shabbos, vein docha es Tumah. Rabbi Yehuda omer af docha es Tumah. Boom. That the Tanna Kama says that Pesach Sheni is docha Shabbos, but it is not docha Tumah, and therefore if you're tamei, you cannot bring the Pesach Sheni. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says that Pesach Sheni is docha Tumah, and therefore if you are tamei, you can bring the Pesach Sheni. My time at the Tanna Kama. How come the Tanna Kama says that somebody who's tamei cannot bring the Pesach Sheni? Well, they say that would make no sense. The reason why he's bringing the Pesach Sheni in the first place is because he was Tameh by the Pesach Rishon, so he couldn't bring the Pesach Rishon. So we say, okay, come back when you're Tahor and bring the Pesach Sheni. If he's Tameh by the Pesach Sheni, obviously he can't offer it. That's the whole point, is that Tameh people can't offer Korban Pesachs, which is how he got here in the first place. Whereas according to Rabbi Yehuda, says, look, yeah, we prefer that you do it b'tara. If you can't do the Pesach Sheni b'tara, so do it b'tumah. Okay. Tanu Rabban, Pesach Rishon doches Shabbos, Pesach Sheni doches Shabbos. We have a brayso that says that just like the Pesach Rishon is doches Shabbos, Pesach Sheni is also doches Shabbos. Pesach Rishon doches Atuma, Pesach Sheni doches Atuma. That just like Pesach Rishon is doches Atuma, i.e., if the majority of Am Yisrael is Tameh, so then they bring the Korban Pesach b'tumah. Whereas, and we're saying that by Pesach Sheni as well, if you are Tameh, obviously we're not talking about majority of Am Yisrael, because the majority of Am Yisrael doesn't bring the Pesach Sheni, but if you are Tameh, so you could bring the Korban Pesach b'tumah. Now this is interesting, this is a new concept. Pesach Rishon ta'un lina, Pesach Sheni ain't ta'un lina. No, what? Pesach Rishon ta'un lina, Pesach Sheni ta'un lina. That just like the Pesach Rishon requires lina, the Pesach Sheni also requires lina. What this means, it's not talking about lina that we've been always talking about in the context of korbanis that were not put on the Mizbeach. No, rather what this is talking about is that you have to you have to sleep in Yerushalayim on the first night of Yom Tov. The first night of Yom Tov, you have to sleep in Yerushalayim. Now, interestingly, Rashi points out that even the rest of Yom Tov, for the rest of the 7 days, you're still not allowed to go too far. You can't go home. You still have to be in Jerusalem. But you don't have to be within the walls of Jerusalem. The first night of Pesach, you mamish have to sleep within the walls of Jerusalem. After the first night, you can, if you're getting some space, outside the walls of Jerusalem, that's fine as long as it's within the Tchum. But anyways, so we're saying that the Pesach Rishon, you need to stay in Jerusalem. You have to sleep within the walls of Jerusalem that night. And the Pesach Sheni, you also have to stay within the walls of Jerusalem that night. Amar Mai, we said earlier, Doches Atuma, that Pesach Sheni is Doche Tuma. Kiman Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so that's clearly like Rabbi Yehuda, who says that Pesach Sheni is Doche Tuma. Rabbi Yehuda Ton Lina, but one second. That brayso also says that by Pesach, just like by Pesach Rishon, you have to sleep in Jerusalem. Pesach Sheni also you have to sleep in Jerusalem. But Tani Rabbi Yehuda Omer, but Rabbi Yehuda says in a brayso, Minayin the Pesach Sheni she'ein Ton Lina. How do I know that Pesach Sheni does not require Lina? I don't have to sleep within the walls of Jerusalem that night. Shinemar, as the pasuk says, Fanisav abokav halachta lo alecha, that by Lina it says that then the next morning you will go to your tent, which may be outside of the walls of Jerusalem. But that night, until the morning, you got to be in the walls of Jerusalem. And also it says that for 6 days you'll eat matzahs. So only when you have to eat matzah for 6 days do you have to have lina on the first night. You have to sleep in Jerusalem the first night. And therefore Pesach Sheni is not a full-fledged Pesach. You don't have to only eat matzah. You don't have to eat matzah for the next 6 days. So therefore also doesn't apply either, that you have to dafka sleep in Jerusalem that first night. So we see, on the one hand, a brayso which seems to be like Rabbi Yehuda, because it says that Pesach Sheni is Doche Tumah, yet it says that Lina does apply. But we have another brayso which Rabbi Yehuda clearly says that Lina does not apply. So Treitanoy V'Alibi Rabbi Yehuda. Interesting. It's two teachers who were giving conflicting accounts of what Rabbi Yehuda's opinion was. Interesting. Alright, new Mishnah, Pesach Shabbat B'Tumah, Lo Yochlu Mimenu Zavin V'Zavas Nidos V'Yoldos. So, a Korban Pesach Rishon that is brought B'Tumah. The majority of Am Yisrael is Tameh, so they bring the Korban Pesach Rishon B'Tumah. Lo Yochlu Mimenu Zavin V'Zavas, as we've seen before, that a Zav or a Zava would not partake. Nidos V'Yoldos, a Nida or Yoledes. I think that Yoledes is talking about throughout the entire period of her, whether it's 40 or 80 days. Vim achlu p'tur mikaris, but if they did eat it, they will be potter from karis. Rabbi Eliezer poter afal bias mikdash. Rabbi Eliezer extends that even from going into the azar. Right? In general, somebody who's tameh is not allowed to go into the azar. And if they do the chayiv karis. So whereas the Tanakh says that you won't be chayiv for eating, if you're a zav or a zava, you won't be chayiv for eating the Korban Pesach, which is Kodshim, as a Tamei person, but you will be chayiv if, as a Zav or a Zavar, you go into the Azara. For going into the Azara Tamei. Rabbi Eliezer says even that's waived. Says the Gemara, Tana Rabbanan the rabbis taught Zavin v'Zavos nidos v'yoldos she'achlu b'Pesach sheba b'tumah, that they ate the Korban Pesach that was Am Yisrael was Tamei. Yachlu yu chayavin, is it possible that they'll be chayiv for eating Kodshim in a state of Tumah? Tamalomer kotar yochal basar. The pasuk says only people who are tahor could eat meat, and it immediately says following that, v'nefesh asher tochal basar mizevach hashlam masher Hashem v'tumaso alav, somebody who eats meat of a shlamim and is tamei, i.e. somebody who eats kachim who's tamei, v'nichrusa, pashit get karis. Nechol l'torim chayavim alav mishum tamei, only at a time when eating kachim is limited to Torah people. Where am I? Where the heck am I? Yet, in a situation where kachim is not limited to only tahor people, even tamei people could be eating kachim. For example, when the Pesach is ba b'tumah, so you have tamei people eating kachim, eating the Korban Pesach, right? Pesach ba b'tumah nechol b'tumah. So, going back to the principle is that only when eating kachim is limited to Torah people would tamei people be chayiv kares for eating kachim. However, if you already have tamei people eating kachim, because it's Korban Pesach haba b'tumah, so then Zavin and Zavos would not be chayiv for eating kachim b'tumah. Rabbi Eliezer Omer says, Rabbi Eliezer Yochel dachaku Zavin v'nichnesu la'azara v'pesach haba b'tumah yochel yu chayavin. Rabbi Eliezer says, what if Zavin or Mitzrayin went into the Azara v'pesach haba b'tumah, right? So it's a Pesach haba b'tumah. The majority of Am Yisrael is Tmei Meis. Now you have Tmei Meis people going into the Azara. Generally, Tmei Meis people are not allowed into the Machne Shechina. And yet, in this case, they're going into the Azara to slaughter the Korban Pesach, but they're allowed to, because it's the Pesach haba b'tumah. But Zavs, Mitzoras, they're not allowed to, right? They're not part of the Korban Pesach, they don't go into the Azara. What if they did? Would they be chayiv for going into the Beis HaMikdash as a tamei person? Talmud Lomar says, Rabbi Eliezer, that you have to send out of the camp Saras people, Zav people, tamei lenefesh people, at a time when people who are tamei meis get thrown out of the camp, so then also Zavs and Mitzoras are thrown out of the camp. However, if the Tmei Meis people are not thrown out of the camp, i.e. Pesach haba b'tumah, Tmei Meisim are going into the Azara to offer the Korban Pesach, well then also Mitzoras and Zavs, if they went into the camp, they would be pater as well. Rav Yosef Asakasha dochaku Tmei Meisim v'nichnesu leheichal v'Pesach haba b'tumah ma'u. Rav Yosef wants to know, okay, so when it's a Pesach haba b'tumah, so you have the Rov Am Yisrael is tamei, and they're bringing the Korban Pesach b'tumah, and they're even allowed into the Azara. What if they take it one step further? They went into the Heichal. The Azara is like outside of the Heichal. It's where the Mizbeach HaChitzon is. It's where they would slaughter the Korban Pesach. They went into the Heichal where the Shulchan is. Mizbeach HaKtoras. What else is there in? Mizbeach HaKtoras, the Shulchan, the Menorah. These are places that even Kohanim can only go in if they have a specific purpose. Certainly, somebody who's Tmei Meis, who's allowed into the Azara to do the Korban Pesach, would not be allowed to go further into the Heichal. So by Rav Yosef, dachaku Tmei Meisim v'nichnesu leheichal b'Pesach haba b'tumah ma'u. So what happens? Are they chayiv kares? Midi ishtri tumas Azara, ishtri nami tumas Heichal. Do we say, well, clearly they're not chayiv kares for going into the Azara with tumas hameis, because it's a Pesach haba b'tumah. So maybe also they wouldn't be chayiv kares if they went into the Heichal where they're not allowed to. Wait, what? I don't know what I just said, but so maybe just like the Tumas Hazara is waived, also the Tumas Heichal is waived, and they wouldn't be chayiv kares. Or maybe that which was permitted, that which wasn't permitted. So therefore, while they will not be chayiv kares for going into the Azara, because they're allowed to in order to do the Korban Pesach, but that was the only thing that was allowed. Going into the Heichal is as restricted as ever, and they would be chayiv kares if they went into the Heichal. Amar Rava, Amar Kra, says Rava, the pasuk says, Vishalchu min amachne, afilu miktsas machne. It says, Vishalchu min amachne, that they will be sent out from the camp, and that can even be a partial camp, i.e., it is possible to have a situation where the Heichal remains off limits while the Azara is permitted for them to do their Korban Pesach. Ikeda Amr, those who say Amar Rava, there are those who say that Rava's opinion is actually the opposite. Amar Kra, the pasuk says, Vishalchu min amachne, el michutz amachne tishalchum. It says two psukim. One pasuk says that you got to send them out of the camp. And then the very next pasuk says, michutz amachne tishalchum, that you have to send them out of the machne. Only when they're not allowed into the Azara would they also be thrown out of the Heichal, right? I.e., that when one applies, the other applies. When the one applies doesn't apply, the other doesn't apply. So therefore, since the Tmei Mesim are allowed into the Azara, therefore they wouldn't be chayiv kares if they went into the Heichal as well. So two basically opposite opinions of Rava. The first one says that even though they're allowed into the Azara, they're not allowed into the Heichal. Well, they're never allowed into the Heichal, but they would be chayiv. They would still be chayiv kares for going into the Heichal. The other opinion is that no, since they're not chayiv kares for going into the Azara, they're also not chayiv kares for going into the Heichal. That was Daf Tzadihei. I hope everybody enjoyed it. I'm confident that everybody enjoyed it. What did Daf Tzadihei talk about? So the differences between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. That was really the bulk. That was really 3/4 of the daf. Some notable differences are that by Pesach Sheni you're allowed to have chametz around. You don't say Hallel by the Pesach Sheni. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it would be Dochet Tumah, which, by the way, is a machlokas between Tanna Kamma and Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanna Kamma says that Pesach Sheni is not Dochet Tumah. Rabbi Yehuda says that Pesach Sheni is Dochet Tumah. Okay, Zavs and Zavas when it comes to Pesach Sheni, or even Pesach Rishon, really. No, Zav and Zavas when it comes to Pesach Rishon. So the Tanna Kamma says that they would, so Zav and Zavas do not eat the Pesach Rishon when it's Ba B'tumah, but according to Tanna Kamma, if they ate it, they would be potter from eating Kodshim B'tumah, which would be Kares, so they're potter from that. However, if they go into the Beis HaMikdash, where they're not allowed to go, they'd be Chayiv Kares. According to Rabbi Eliezer, not only are they potter for eating the Korban Pesach, they're also potter from going into the Beis HaMikdash. We then add a question. When you have Tmei Mesim, who are allowed to go into the Beis HaMikdash, into the Azara, in order to offer the Korban Pesach when it's Ba B'tumah, what if they went further into the Heichal? So we had two opinions of Rava. One opinion was that they would be Chayiv Kares. The other opinion was that they would not be Chayiv Kares. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.